So, Marsha, welcome back to Unbroken. It's really good to see you again. And I think today we're going to talk about what the process of being with someone who's dying is like, what it's like physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. I know you've just gone through that process. And so welcome and thank you for coming on and being willing to talk about that, because everyone in the world at some point or other faces the death of a loved one. And so I think this might be really helpful for people. So thank you for being willing to talk about it.
Thanks, Max. It's good to see you too. It's been too long, so it's good to be back with you.
Yeah.
I'll start by saying that a few months back, my brother got diagnosed with fourth stage lung cancer, and in the beginning he was staying with friends, and I encouraged him to go the alternative natural route, which he was reluctant to do, and decided on the advice of his friends and everyone to go with the strictly medical route. So he went through the chemotherapy and he went through the radiation, and over a period of about 3 months he just got sicker and sicker and weaker and weaker until the point where he couldn't walk down the steps anymore by himself to his apartment. And so I brought him to my home, said, okay, brother, you've done it your way. I'm going to bring you to my home. And I got hospice involved because it's not something you can do on your own.
Yeah.
And the hospice people were really very helpful. I was really reluctant to sign on with them at first because to me it was giving up. But, and one of the things that I experience as a healer, an energetic healer, I just see people as getting better and helping them get better. So he didn't want that aspect of me. And so it was real different for me. I had to just take him where he was and to just love him and care for him in the way that he wanted. And so I worked with the medical doctors in the hospice as best I could to be his advocate. And he came here right before Christmas, and I talked to Source and I said, I'd really love for him to be here through the holidays. And then he died on January the 1st. So I feel like he consciously had had enough and of the suffering. And what I went through during that time was something that I've never faced. And it was extraordinarily difficult for me to watch this man who was 11 years my junior. I had helped raise him. I had it was interesting how we kind of came full circle. I changed his diapers when he was young and changed his diapers as he died. I fed him as he was younger, and I fed him as he was getting too weak to feed himself. And it was, I think, one of the hardest things any of us ever face is to watch someone that you love deteriorate so rapidly, and especially if they pass. And so I watched this strapping, healthy man from a couple of years ago just deteriorate in front of my eyes, and it was so difficult. By the time he passed, he literally, when people get these illnesses, they stop eating. Is one of the things that they do. They just won't eat. And he lost so much weight. He literally looked like he'd been in the pictures of the concentration camps. He was 6'2" and weighed about 110 pounds.
Okay.
And part of what I found so difficult was to accept the deteriorating body, and extremely hard to watch. But one thing that kept me going, he was my little brother, is I kept remembering him as a small child. He was, he was very cute. He would follow me around, his big sister. And we were always just really unreasonably close. We were so different, but by the same time, we had this really tight bond. And even though he was married and had children, he asked me to be the one to watch over him during this period. And so it was a great, great honor for me.
Yeah.
He trusted me to do what was right for him. He turned over his life, his affairs, everything to me. And so here I am taking full responsibility for my younger brother. And it was kind of overwhelming, you know. There's always questioning, are you doing the right thing? Because still have to be an advocate for him. You know, one of the things I noticed is, you know, when hospice came in, it's like, oh, it's all about quality of life and keeping him comfortable. And so I'm like, I'm sorry, but why didn't the medical doctors care about his quality of life while they were burning him with radiation? You know, the radiation is so hard on people, and that's one thing as a healer I really have trouble with, because I know the cures for cancer are out there and that they're being suppressed because the medical system is a money-making establishment. Right. And it doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of good people in the medical system. Surely there are. But the Rife machine, and I have one. I have one in my house that I offered to let him use. Has been shown to cure cancer back in the early 1900s. And the herbs that I study and the Chinese medicine, there's so many different things that can help a person come back from cancer, even the largest stages. But that said, if a person has given up and is not willing to do the work, and quite frankly, if they don't have that deep connection to source, my brother was not a very spiritual man, and he was also an addict. He was an alcoholic. He had very low self-esteem, and it was hard for him to love himself. It was hard for him to see the value of fighting for his life, so he essentially didn't. So I began to see myself as a healer in a different way, as a healer into helping people pass from this plane to the other, because one of the most important things that healers have to do is to respect the free will of the person, you know. And so that's what I did. And I gave him his morphine and gave him his drugs that he wanted, and watched him slowly deteriorate, and to the point where he passed. But it's such an honor, and there's so much fear around death and dying as people get ready. You know, we had some really deep and serious talks, because the other thing about the dying process is it is an enormous opportunity for a soul to clear some things that they have to clear for healing, whether it's on a physical level, it can be on a soul level. And because there's certain things that we have to clear up, it has to be in this physical dimension where they were created. And so as a person passes, they will get the veil, as you say, between this world and the next becomes very thin. And so they will quite often be talking to themselves, making utter nonsense. But my brother was here, and I wouldn't let him watch TV, right? I'm like, this is not the time, as you're passing, to just entertain yourself meaninglessly. And so, you know, some people thought, well, that's mean, he's bored, but he wasn't, because he was talking to himself, he was working through himself. And I guided him spiritually to say, you know, there's no reason to be afraid. There's absolutely no reason, because there is a loving God that's waiting for you. Now, I can't say this by firsthand experience, but I can say it because of my faith. I know that, you know. And and so the best thing we can do, other than to exactly follow a person's free will, is to
Yeah.
give them comfort. And that really can mean spiritual comfort in a lot of ways to assuage this fear of death. And my brother, during his last days, he was looking up. He was doing mantras, right? And we're not talking about a spiritual person who even knew what he was doing.
Wow.
I fully believe that we should allow people to go through their own personal process. And he would do other weird things, like he would take his urinal and want to drink his urine, right? I think he was giving himself urine therapy. But if a nurse was in here or somebody else was in here, they'd stop him immediately. They interfere with the process. And they want to give him so many drugs. They encouraged me to give him drugs for when he was talking crazy, quote unquote, to calm him
Mm.
and for his fear. And it's like people need to be allowed to go through this process. And we who support them need to let them be the guides. And it's not the way it is. Most people and always think they know what's better for somebody else, right?
Yeah.
But particularly during this phase, when they are stepping out, they're going through the veil, the death process starts. And one of the interesting things as caretaker is um, part of you goes with them. And part of me was joining with him, and I'm empathetic anyway, and was feeling what he was feeling. And this is an extremely different experience to be so connected to someone as they're passing. And this is, I have to tell you this beautiful thing. Death is something that none of us, I don't think, really want to go into it. But some of us subconsciously do have a death wish. And I think my brother was one of those because he was not a happy person.
Mm.
He was on drugs and he was on alcohol and he was self-medicating and he was very unhappy for the past few years.
Mm.
Um,
Marsha, I think that's a really good point. I remember in grad school, I took a class and it was all about the different ways that you can commit suicide, and alcoholism and drug use. It's a slow suicide, right? As are other sort of maladaptive behaviors that people do. So, I think what you're saying is really important there. And you as a healer, what you said earlier is your first instinct was to help him recover. You knew that there were ways that he could heal that cancer, right? So that must have been really challenging, really hard, because he didn't want to,
Right.
But I really do agree with you. The role of a healer, we're there to help people with that process of healing or leaving or whatever it is. We can't do it for them. We have to just be there to support them in what they are doing. So that was like such a step that you made. And, I mean, I don't want to, put you in a vulnerable position here, but I was just wondering, like, what did that feel like in that moment? Like, how did you make that transition to understanding that you really had to let him have his free will, as you mentioned?
Yeah, that was a really big thing for me as a healer. And well, what happened 10 years ago is I lost my other brother, who was 4 years younger. And that's when I really, really got the lesson because I was calling him and telling him, you could do this, you could do that, you could do this. And he got to the point where he was really, really mad at me and wouldn't talk to me. And so this isn't the first time I've experienced that. As a healer, it's like I'm, dead set on making people better and know the ways to do it. So it was a big lesson for me. At what point did I really got it was with my my first brother who passed, and it's because he got so angry. He just got so angry, and people always want to be listened to, wherever they want to be heard, wherever they are in consciousness, and we owe them that, to love them right where they are. And it's a big part of healing is to meet people where they are, is to actually go in and find their frequency and get on that frequency with them.
Wow.
It's a big step.
So you took your brother into your home, right? Which I remember when you told me you were doing that, and I thought, oh my God, that's a huge, huge commitment. It sounds easy in theory, but you had the hospital bed in a section of your house, you had all this medical equipment, and you have this adult person that is your beloved baby brother, but is also an adult man who, you haven't lived with since you were a child. And so, and that whole thing is inserted into your routine and your home life. So talk to me about that. Like, what was that like? It must have been overwhelming.
It was extremely traumatic, and it was, because at first I didn't know what to do. I didn't know whether to call hospice, because to me, that when you call hospice, like, that's the end, you're giving up, and I wasn't ready to give up on it. And the other alternatives are to get home health care, which ends up costing a lot of money, which neither one of us had. And I had a busy, full life, and so I had to stop everything I was doing. I had to take my two horses and get them pastured somewhere else because I didn't have the time to take care of them, and had to turn half of my office and my mudroom into a hospital bed. And it was just like bada bing, bada boom. It's like go, 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 do it, do it, do it. And but hospice was right here because he was in the hospital, and the hospital was pushing, hey, where's he going to go? He's got to have a place to go, and they weren't providing a place for him. He could only go to rehab, but then you don't go to rehab unless you plan on getting better. And he couldn't do any of the rehab exercises or anything. And so it was a real push. It was a lot of stress. And then I had to come in. Fortunately, I have a very loving companion who's with me. I don't know how I would have been able to get through it without her. But we came and we just basically pushed everything aside, and they came in one day and set up the hospital bed and the oxygen and the whole 9 yards. And then he came via medical transport because he was too weak. And then all of a sudden, it's like my life isn't my own anymore. It's taking care of his needs became everything. But fortunately, my companion was able to take care of me a little bit because he didn't eat the same things we tried to get him to eat in the beginning, but we gave up that at a point where he just wouldn't eat. He just refused. And so, but in the beginning, we were making two meals, one for us, one for him, and it was extraordinarily stressful. And then I would sleep at night in the room right next to him, but I was half sleeping because I was always listening for whether he needed me or was making funny noises or whether there were any noises coming from him. And so I didn't get much sleep at all either. And after he passed, that continued. There was a couple of weeks where I was still listening for him,
Out of habit.
Got in that mindset. And so I was traumatized too. And then when you have to deal with his passing, that's another part because I knew that it wasn't going to be long, and you can't. The doctors here, at any rate, when I brought him here, I didn't know if he was going to be here for the next 2 years or the next 2 weeks. And the doctors would not commit when it comes to saying they think somebody's going to die. At least the ones here, they wouldn't give me any idea of his status of where he was. But after he was here a couple of weeks, I could see you can't just not eat for, it had been 2 months that he'd stopped eating. You can't just not eat and live. And then he couldn't take himself to the bathroom anymore. He couldn't get up and walk around anymore. I knew it wasn't going to be too long. And then it was New Year's Day. I was here, and my companion was here, Pat was here, and we were just taking care of him. And it was very interesting that day. We were really, really bonded in a way because hospice had been coming in and giving him a sponge bath and every day except for on the weekends. And then on the weekends I had to do it. So I gave him a really tender sponge bath that morning, and of course he was at a place where he didn't even want to be touched. And just listening, and then about 7 o'clock at night, his breathing got really, really, really hard. He had a hard time breathing, and we called hospice to come over and got out the nebulizer and tried to get his breathing going. And he pushed us away. He never had done that before. He's like this. He's like, no more treatments, no more nothing. But at that point, we established this link because he couldn't talk.
Oh.
But I understood him completely. He's like, I'm out of here. And I got the chance to tell him right before he passed. It's hard for me not to get emotional. I got a chance to tell him. Mine was the last voice he heard. I got a chance to tell him how much I loved him, and how much he meant to me, and that he was going to be okay. I said, "You're going to be okay. You're going to be fine." And God loves you and doesn't judge you. Okay, there's no judgment, because yeah. So you didn't live up to my expectations in your life. Well, it's not my job. We never know where a soul is, what they've been through, what they're going through, and to judge them. And I had a hard time, I admit, not judging him. When people don't live up to their potential, and we can see what they could be, some of us. But I had to let go of all the judgment, and I told him God doesn't judge you. And then in those last 3 minutes, he was like, get out of the room. And he transmitted to me, I don't want you to see me like this. Okay. So I went in the next room with Pat, and we prayed and meditated, and we could hear him fighting for his breath. And then it got quiet. And then the next instant that it got quiet, I saw Jesus Christ. It was like, really, in my mind's eye, Jesus Christ was right there. And Jesus Christ transmitted to me, I've got him. Oh. So it was like I passed him over to Jesus. And, I'm not a real religious person, but I've always respected Jesus. And my brother didn't have this great relationship with him, but he had enough. And we saw him, and then I saw my brother. He turned around and looked at me, and he smiled, and he waved. Oh. And at the same time, Pat was just focusing on this overwhelming, overpowering sense of love and light that just came over this house. Wow. When he was gone. And so, if I hadn't known before, I surely know now. Yeah. That there's always someone there to meet those who are passing over and give them guidance. Yeah. And so that gave me so much comfort to see Jesus. Wow. And of course then we had to go through having his mortuary, calling the mortuary, and having them come take his body. And the thing about caretakers and people who loved ones passes, it's the time when they are under the most stress that they have to make all these important decisions.
Mm.
Like, okay, what do you do with the remains? Do you have a memorial service? When do you have it? What do you do with their finances, and how do you pay the bills, and how do you get into probate, and it becomes really, really overwhelming. Now, you have funeral homes that take care of that for a high dollar. We'll help you with all that stuff. And neither my brother or I had a big budget, so I took care of all those details. And he decided he wanted to get cremated, and which I had to agree with too. I don't think the laying out of the body is I think it's kind of crude that people still do that. But anyway, that's my personal opinion. Anyway, and so for the next month, I was arranging memorial service and picking up his remains, and that too was entirely. It was so stressful. It's like it's freaky.
So I guess without really thinking about it, one would assume like when he passed, that was it, right? But there's a whole bunch of things to do after that. So I want to get back to that, but I want to kind of focus on some of the things you've said, which is that dying process, and how you saw Jesus Christ and you saw him waving, and I mean, that was a profoundly beautiful and spiritual experience. And I myself, as a child, had many experiences of what you call near-death experiences, where I died and left my body and could see my body lying there. And every single time, Marsha, Jesus Christ was there. Every single time. So I have also heard this from many, many, many other people. So I think that's like so interesting and amazing, because that's a very shared experience by a lot of people. And like, so it's there in every hard experience, there's so much beauty too, right? There's so much, and then the love that you felt afterwards, that I just wanted to sort of speak to that and highlight that, because that's not something most people think about. We're kind of trained in this reality to just look at the physical, and we think that we are our bodies, right? So
right.
Most people may fear death because it feels like I'm ended, right? And so you were sort of holding his hand, so to speak, and telling him, somebody's going to come meet you. You're going to be okay. And I mean, that's also transmitting to him that you're not ending. You're just exiting here and you're going over here. So I just wanted to highlight that point, that death is not some kind of ending, and the physical body can deteriorate and stop. But that's just a transition point, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it becomes very, very evident when you view a body that no longer has a soul in it, that there's got to be something animating that body. There absolutely has to be, and there can be no end to it. It lives forever. It just changes dimensions, or it changes where it is. But even the death process brings home that point so strongly, that there's got to be something animating that body. And you think about the physical body, and it's Earth. The Mother Earth has given us this body, right? And so it seems very appropriate that it should go back to the Earth, and I think in the quickest and easiest way possible. Actually, at one time I was meditating on the graveyard, and I got this spiritual download, that what a travesty it is, all the graves that we have people. And this is a little bit of a different subject, but as an electrical engineer, all the graves, usually the people are cast in metal. And so Mother Earth is actually in travail because she is not able to reclaim those physical elements of it. And I was able at that point to feel the sorrow of Mother Earth for all these people who are in these graves that she's not been able to reunite with their physical bodies. And
Wow.
that's a whole nother subject.
Yeah, that is interesting. So just to go on that tangent for a second, um, I have heard, and I don't know if this is true, but I've heard that when you cremate someone, they can leave this plane faster, that there's life force that stays in your bones for a while and that kind of thing. And I know there's many ancient tribal cultures that burn their dead for this very reason. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll talk about that for just a minute because it's an important point, and that's why I was fully with his decision to be cremated, and I would make that for myself. And the other thing is, it does make it easier. But one thing you want to do, this is you take this for what it's worth. This is from my spiritual teachings, is to wait at least 3 days
Yes.
to give the soul time
Yes.
to completely leave and all the energy that's associated with the physical body to completely leave. So that was one stipulation that I made to the mortuary, was to wait at least 3 days. And they said, well, if you want to wait longer, it costs more money because it has to be refrigerated. I'm like, 3 days, that does it. But one thing that I'm noticing, and the people in hospice are noticing, is so many people passing. It's just, uh, I can't say exactly why it is, but people seem to be leaving this plane right and left. And so it was actually 10 days before they cremated him because they had so many deaths that they were trying to handle after the first of the year. But yes, I strongly recommend cremation for that reason. It's to allow the soul to completely leave, and also to return Mother Earth, part of her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this whole when you really deal with the whole dying process, I think it really brings to the forefront that we are souls, that we're souls in a body, in a flesh suit, in a material realm, having a life, having an experience. But we're also always, even when we're alive, more than that, right? So I think a good takeaway is I mean, and I know you already live this way, but to see it in someone who's dying, but also to take that and say, that's also part of the living, right? Like,
Right.
why are we limiting our living to this narrow band of reality? Because that soul and that connection to Jesus Christ or source or whatever, right? That can be available while we're alive as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to be able to see across the veil, like it becomes natural for someone in the dying process, because their focus starts to turn there. But we can do that anytime. Well,
Yeah. And a dying person, they step into that next dimension and they step back into the physical and they step in and it's a bit of a dance and then they go, right?
right,
And
right.
I've also heard of that 3-day thing, because, when you leave your body, you're still you still have your mind and your consciousness, and you're very aware that there are people that you've left behind. And they're
Hmm.
going to be very sad and have a lot of grief and loss. And so I've heard countless times stories of people who, after they pass, they visit their relatives. That happened to me when my maternal grandmother died. I was in the United States and she was in Italy. I didn't know that she had passed on, but I don't know if it was a dream or I was awake, but she was at the foot of my bed. And she was telling me that she was going and that everything was okay. And then the next day I found out that she had actually passed. So that's a pretty common experience too. And I mean, you had that too with your brother, right?
Right, right. It really is. And but one thing I wanted to ask you, Max, and part of this is when I had to face my brother's death, I've never faced anything to that degree. And there were times when I really didn't know how much more I could take. I thought it I thought I'm really at the end of what I can deal with. I think I'm really at the end of my rope, so to speak. I don't know, but I thought that I was really going to lose it, that I just couldn't take any more of it. Um, there was so much to it. And watching him, the man that he was, and trying to maintain some dignity as he went out, it was hard for him. And just all of the chaos and the decisions and having a little bit of support, really good support from my partner, but not from my family or his family. I really thought at times that I was going to crack, and I don't know that I've ever felt that way before. And quite honestly, it made me think about you, because the things you have been through in life, and one of the reasons that I have such great respect for you, there are many, is how you have managed to not only come through it, but to heal yourself and to be this example for the rest of us, and how important it is as a healer. I think the things that we go through, we can help the people most who go through things that we've been through already.
Yeah.
And I see it as part of my healing education. But when I think about you, it's like, how did you manage? How in the world did you manage to not only survive, but to be the person you are today, having dealt with the numerous things that you've had to deal with, Max? I'm sitting here going, I can barely deal with one person dying, and look over here at what Max has had to deal with. Do you want to speak to that, Max?
Sure. I mean, the first thing I'll say is you did deal with it. And there is a thing in us. We are very resilient, and we have this inner strength, and maybe we don't need to tap into it until we do, but we rise. I mean, you either will be broken and destroyed, or you will grow. You will rise to that next level that you need to. You'll find the strength because you need to, right? There isn't a choice. So that's maybe one facet of it. I mean, my choice was die or survive and keep going. So out of necessity, you make the choice that you have to make. I mean, the other part of it was I did have this strong connection with Jesus Christ, with Source, with the light. And, I think we all as children, I certainly was aware that I was a soul and that I'd come into this plane for a lifetime. I thought this plane was pretty darn dark and like crazy and, awful. I was shocked. But I think all children know that. And in a paradoxical way, because I went through such intense and just unbelievable experiences, I didn't lose that as quickly because I needed that connection. And it was the only way, like having that was the only way that I could go forward. So it didn't get educated out of me, or, I didn't kind of adapt to letting that go. I did see a lot of, not just dead bodies, but bodies that were tortured in all kinds of horrible and, terrifying ways. And it did affect me deeply because I'm so empathic that I feel. So for me, what's worse is suffering. But death, I could see that death could be a release and a comfort and something that ends that suffering. So I developed this. I didn't see death as a bad thing. I had also died and come back, right? And when I left my body, the experience was expansion and joy and oneness. And so I knew in my bones that when people exit, they're gonna be okay, right? And there was one Ethiopian man that I remember in my uncle's facility that was being tortured, and I was being made to interact and watch, as which was my torture. And in that moment, I found his heart was failing and he was really scared. And I remember I rose to the occasion because I needed to comfort him. I was a child. I didn't know what to do, but it just came to me. So I want to say that sometimes those periods of stress open up a whole new layer of ability or power. And so I looked him in the eye. And my connection was, I love you. I just poured love at him, and you're going to be okay. And then it was really odd. It was like what you say about your brother. It's like my hand, not my physical hand, but it went over and held his hand and helped him to exit out of his body. And in that moment, he wasn't suffering anymore and he was out. And then he looked at me like your brother and he smiled and he said, I love you, and so that made it okay, So it's really horrific to watch bodies when they're decaying, when they're being burned or stabbed, or all these horrible things that happen to us. That is very, very painful. And I have felt that pain, but so on one level, I can say, I don't know how I did it. On another level, I can say, because I had to. And on a deeper level, it's because of love. It's because we're all here in this soup right now. And we're all really connected as one bigger soul, whatever you want to call that. And so I had so many people that were killed in front of me, but I always made a connection. And so what I held on to is that love and that connection. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of what's coming up for me.
It does. It really helps. And it helps me to remember and realize that during the moments that I was with Scott, my brother, where I was having the hardest time, I would think of him as that little boy that I adored, that I really, really did love him. And so to bring this love forth that I had for him as a child really, really helped me. It is all about love, Max.
It is. It absolutely is. And, having talked to you through this experience, you gained a level almost too. I mean, I was very impressed with the fact that you took him in, and you had some help with the hospice, but really he was there and you were willing to take care of your brother, and he had a wife and he had adult children, and yet you stepped up and you put everything on hold for months. So I feel like that was a spiritual gift that you gave, but you also received, right? So the whole experience of going through that in the end was a really powerfully positive experience, and it enhanced you, right? I mean, I'm going to guess that it did.
Yeah, I'm sure that it has. And just, from the aspect that emotionally, I feel like I can cope with some of the tough things that life throws at us better than I could before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even the part where after he passed, where you had to deal with these, the world and the bureaucracy of all these things and the insurance and the mortuary and the whatever. I mean, as you say, people are leaving this planet, and I think will continue to in increasing numbers, right? And I'm not going to say the different reasons that I know why that's happening, because I don't.
But it plays out in my life. It's playing out.
Yeah. So this is something that we're all going to be confronted with going forward. We've always been confronted with death and dying, but I do see that there's a huge uptick in that. There's reasons which we won't discuss on this, video, because we don't want to be censored, but it doesn't matter. There's also I believe there's a transition happening, right? So we're splitting apart the old and we're going towards the new. And so that's part of it, I think. And it's okay. So I just want to say, for me, like, I struggle, but then I come back to, it's okay. It's okay. Like your brother, we have free will choice. Some people will not be able to rise in frequency or do whatever's necessary in terms of their inner work or their shadow work to go that route, right? And so they're going to leave. But that's okay, because they're a soul, and their journey here, they've achieved what they've achieved here in their growth and in their development, and they're not ready for where we're going. So they will leave, and they will come back in a different form somewhere else, or here, whatever, and they will continue, their soul will continue that journey. So when you zoom out and you see that life is much more than this vessel here in this, like, at most 100-year lifespan, when you zoom out and you see that life is the journey of our soul, and it's eternal, it's infinite. It comes into a material realm of whatever variety. I'm sure there's lots of planets and realms that we can't even imagine, because we're in this one. And it grows, and it learns, and it develops, and it creates. I think we come here to create something for ourselves and everybody else. So that's the bigger picture. So when you zoom out and you realize that you're just a soul, and you're coming into a realm, you're leaving a realm, it isn't any big deal. We never actually die in the sense that we're taught, right? We don't ever stop existing. And I know that, because when I left my body, my mind was still thinking. It was still just me, right? I just wasn't in here. So I think that's a really important piece, to zoom out and to look at the bigger picture. Like, it's all okay. It's all okay.
Thanks, Max. You have eloquently spoke to something that is very meaningful, and yeah, we do seem to, we focus so much on ourselves, especially when we're in pain or stress, that sometimes we forget about in the big picture, and it's all going to be okay.
It is. I mean, that doesn't take away the grief, the loss, right? Because we have relationships here. We have people, we love them, and then they leave. And I mean, I think the worst case scenario of all that is anyone losing a child, right? I mean, that's just really, really heartbreaking. So I'm not trying to minimize that. But if we allow ourselves to open to that and feel it and connect, like you were able to do with your brother and I was able to do with people, it's painful, but we can be a part of it. And then I'm going to say, it's absolutely possible to talk to our loved ones even when they're not here. That's the other
absolutely
thing, right? You want to speak to
that? Sure. And it's kind of a catch-22 when someone passes. You don't want to hold them to this realm, while at the same time you want to connect with them. So it's helpful and to have different rituals, if you want to call it that. But my companion Pat and I have done several things to help him move on. One of them dispatcho ceremony. She's a shaman, and it was really, really beautiful to help them let go of what they will tend to do is hang out and worry about people, you know, or hang on to certain kinds of things. And this is where you go into the realm of what we call discarnates or ghosts who actually do exist. They're people who have refused to go on. And so while you want to be able to still communicate with them, and you can, uh, but especially in the beginning, it's better to work with letting them go. And that's one of the benefits too of having a memorial service, or a celebration of life, we like to call it, which I also conducted for my brother, is to bring all his friends and people who love him and family together to honor him and to honor his life, and then to send him off. And that really is more for the people who remain, honestly, but it does help them as well. It helps the people in the grieving process. And it's something that we have to do, is to grieve, is to feel our feelings, is to shed our tears. And trust me, I've done plenty of that. Because when they pass, you always want to go, well, maybe I should have done this, or I should have done that, or we could have done this differently, and you start second guessing yourself, and but that's pointless. And it is to let them go. And there's a book that's really, really helpful. It's called The Afterlife of Billy Fingers. I don't know if you've ever heard of that book. But it's a story of a young man who was also a drug addict, who passed, and his sister was real worried about his soul because of, he didn't have this great life. And then he comes back to her, and they have conversations. It's really quite a good book. I'd highly recommend that. I'm going to read it again. The Afterlife of Billy Fingers. I'd put it in the thread or something later. But so there are things like that can help us too.
I agree I think that's why rituals exist in all cultures. They're rites of passage. They're ways to cope with the transitions that we have, I mean, I remember when I was giving birth to my daughter, there was a death of who I used to be, and there was a rebirth into becoming a mother, which is a very different reality. I mean, talk about a learning curve there too. So there's rituals when people transition from like puberty into adulthood. There's rituals everywhere for death. They call them funerals, they call them wakes, they call them celebrations of life. And I think that is really important for all of us, and for the departed as well. And you're right. I have heard and studied that what ghosts are the souls of people that they didn't go, they stuck around here because of a variety of reasons. And sometimes that reason is that the person that they left behind doesn't want them to go, and they feel so responsible that they stay, and that doesn't help, either person. So there is something about surrendering to the process. I mean, we cry because it's a necessary thing. We have emotions, it's energy in motion. That's what an emotion is. And it does help us. We're always moving forward, and we're always living and dying, even when we're alive in this body, right? I mean, there's so many times in our lives that something in us dies and a new thing gets born in a million different ways. So rather than resist that process, that's what causes the suffering, right? It's just to kind of just go with it.
Well, you have to go with it. Another one of my favorite books is Feelings Buried Alive Never Die. And in our culture, emotional people is looked down upon. Emotions are looked down upon, and I think that's on purpose, especially with men. Bless them. But we have to feel these things. We have to feel them, and we have to feel our way through them to get to the other side. Otherwise, we hold on to them, and we hold on to them long enough, they get buried in our subconscious, and they actually become physical problems. The physical and emotional bodies are so interconnected, as is the spiritual and the mental body. And so many times, as you know, as a therapist, a person can be physically healed when they deal with the emotions of an event or a trauma.
Right.
And that is one of the things that's helped me get through this time is um, listen to polyvagal tapes, because of the vagus nerve gets into trauma, and we get stuck in fight or flight. And uh, you know, I mean, my whole world was turned upside down. And then for me to reclaim life, and my own life, has been a little bit of a process, because the death energy is something that you have to clear it. So we've also cleared the house, and cleared all of Scott's things and the medical
For
equipment.
people who might not know how to do that, why don't, because I know you're really an expert on that. How do you clear your house? And you're talking about it, but I think it's really important to share with people what are the steps that brought, that got you back to where you are today.
Well, one of the first things was clearing the house, and there are a lot of different ways to do it, and it can get very in depth. But one of the best things that help is fresh flowers. And that's one reason, whether people know it or not, whether it's so important to send flowers to a memorial service, because and of course, I love the Bach flower essences. All the different flowers have personalities that put their energies into the atmosphere, and and there's all different kinds of them. But having fresh flowers is a big part. And of course, there's prayers that you do, and energy. It really is a bit of a science, but um, and certain smells or aromas that are very purifying, particularly in certain prayers. It's a whole nother subject to get into it, but it is a process. It's important to release the person completely, to release their clothes, their belongings, their whatever you can release, to go ahead and release them, so that the living can benefit from any of them.
I hadn't thought of that, but I've heard a lot of people who lose someone, they keep the clothes in the closet and the items in the house. Sometimes the room becomes a shrine. So that's a really good one. It is important to clear that and to let that keep going,
Right. Because that's another way to hold on to them. And I'm not saying, I have my brother's pocket knife. I'm not saying don't keep something that you remember them by, or keeps their memory fresh. But if you become too enmeshed in keeping their things, turning their room to a shrine or whatever, then that can delay their evolution as well as your own.
As well as ours, right? Because then we can't move forward either. And because we're in a physical form, we get stuck with this idea that, well, that they are that way their room looks, or that article of clothing or whatever. And that's not the case. Those were just things that were part of that. So it's really important to let go for us to be able to move on. And I would almost say, like, if you're holding on to the possessions, you're fixated on a very narrow band of who that person is. And if you let that go, you'll open up that bigger spiritual connection.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, and their vibration is in it. Their DNA is in it. So it's most beneficial to let most of that go. Yeah.
So, Marsha, I really appreciate the vulnerability, the openness that you have shown today in talking about that experience. I know it's really been really rough for you. So I think this is going to help a lot of people, you know, because like you and I know, there's going to be more and more of this occurring. And so it's just a great inner journey to explore today. So as we kind of wrap up, I just, you know, what do you want to leave people with? Like, what do you want to kind of say as a summary, or anything that you want to leave people with that might be helpful?
Well, I think the crux of what we're talking about is, first of all, while you're alive, love your life and be passionate about it. And because that's really the reason we're here, is our source put us here to thrive and to have an experience and to be co-creators. And another big lesson is accept people where they are.
Yeah.
And as free will is the law of the universe, is to honor someone's free will, to meet them where they are, and to let go of judgment. And I admit that was hard for me too, because you never know where a soul really is. Um, and to judge is not ours to do.
Yeah.
But when the time does come, and as far as I know, at least at this stage of our lives, people do die. While, part of what I look at as this new world is emerging is we're meant to have very long lifetimes. We were initially designed to live 1,000 years or more.
Correct.
And to keep that in mind, if you adopt a lifestyle, and of course, the most important part of that lifestyle is a connection to source, and love yourself, and you love yourself by taking care of yourself, then you can live a long and healthy life. But when the time comes, there will be someone to greet or to usher you where you need to go, without a doubt.
Yeah. And you won't ever cease, not even for a second.
Nope.
You'll always be you. You'll just have more, you'll see more. I mean, it's actually narrower here than it is when you leave. So
it's true. We're having a particular type of experience in a physical body, which is really challenging at times, but we chose to do it. So,
yep, we did. And we may have forgotten that, but it behooves us to remember. And we are here temporarily.
mm-hmm.
I mean, we know that, and we deny it, because it's scary, but it shouldn't be scary. It's just, we continue just in a different version, and if
right.
sometimes we come back and we reincarnate into the same family system that we left, right? So
mm-hmm.
there's loss, and yet nothing is ever lost, right?
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Marsha, and I look forward to talking with you on a variety of other topics, and I think this was really, really valuable, so thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Max. I just hope that those out there can benefit through our experience.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.